1 second, sorry. And then we'll go here, share. All right, can y'all see my screen just fine?
Yep, looks good.
Okay, so I'm gonna pull up Inkscape, and you can see I've already created one. Now, a lot of times I'm gonna show you how I created this thing, but just for fonts, right? So that we're on the main page of Inkscape. So a lot of times when you're cutting, you may wanna make something that stands, and that's why I've created it like this, right? So notoriously, if you drop a font into Easel, it will have issues with that font. Or it may be copyrighted or whatever the case may be. And especially if you're just trying to do it from home use, like that personal use, that copyright shouldn't apply. So notoriously, like we ended up downloading a font, the NFL Chiefs, right? You recognize that font. So I'm just going to type my name for sake, right? And then I'll put it in. But when you type that in, this font specifically is an example of one that'll give you problems in Easel. But all you want to do is basically type in your font. You can adjust the size. You can do however you want to. You can adjust the length and width up here. I don't know how to move this off my screen. Oh, there we go. You can adjust the length and height however you want to do. And then, or you can locking it and moving it up, or you can flex it as you see fit. Now, with that in mind, once you get that height, all you'll want to do is you'll just go up to path. This is where all of your, in the path block or the path, the drop down menu is how you do almost everything. And you just go to the first one, object to path. Now you can select each one of them, and each one of them has those nodes, and there's now an SVG, right? So when you have it, the only other thing you may want to do, now you can absolutely cut it out just like this. You can import it just like this, right? Or you can actually take and do like I do, and I'll drop in a square to combine them all, right? So I know this, for example, we'll just make it an even 12 inches across, right? So we'll take this and make it 12 inches across. Now the issue is this square is also not an SVG. So if I don't turn it into an SVG, it'll have a problem. So we're going to center this up. Whoops, I selected both of them. We'll drop it down on the bottom. So now they're connected at the bottom. But first I also have to go back into path. I select it, go back into path, and hit object to path. Now, when I select it, you see it has the nodes. You see what I'm saying? Now, at the same time, I don't want it to be too tall, obviously. So we'll adjust it. Usually a ½ inch is about right. And now you're very close to what you want to do. So I'll show you. We'll delete this, and I'll save this for sake. And we'll put it into Easel in just a minute. But if I drop this into Easel right now, which I'll show you, which as you can see, I have a ton of files in here. And I think most of us, correct me if I'm wrong, Drew, I think most people use Easel. But if we import the SVG.
Yeah, that's the basic one that we start because it's free. It's a free G-code one. So yeah.
So you'll see
perfect.
It's not, each one of them is now separate, right? Whoops. So you can see it there. Sorry, I'm struggling here. There you go. You see how it's, if we went and made this a cut outside the path, you'll see how it's separate. So the last thing you really want to do is you want to come back into Inkscape. You'll select everything, then go path and union it. Well, I should say this. Actually, you got to select it this way. I'm sorry, you got to use this little. So these two, one lets you select larger objects. The pointer beneath it lets you select individual. So what you'll do is you'll select 2 objects, and then you'll path and union, and they become one. Select the next one, path, union, and they'll combine together. I say that. Oh, they're not touching. That's a fun path.
Can you explain what you just did there for the uninitiated to see that they're not touching?
I actually didn't combine them. So all you'll end up doing, so basically right now, as you saw in Easel, they're all separate. And when they're all separate, you can't, they want to cut out separately. So what you'll end up doing especially if you're wanting to put that line together, is you'll select it, basically select all the nodes, just like I did there, and you'll bump it down into that line, just like all of these. So if you need them, select them all, bump it down into that line to get it even, right? Now, when I union them, or I combine them, so I go path and union, they all connect together. You see how those are now one piece? And the same with these, right? I go to path and union, now it's all one. Now when I save, and I go back into easel, what you'll see, delete that one, I didn't, is it's now one piece. You see how that's now all combined as an SVG, not an image. Does that make sense? Now,
yeah, that's excellent, Loren.
Now, the next thing I'm going to show you is we can take any one of the images. So we'll do another one. And I'm going to show you the last real thing that really helps, right? So I think I just accidentally closed it. No, there it is. So we're going to import an image from one of my wife's multiple projects. Any one of these, right? So let's go with, we'll just go with this cow, for example. So if I move it over the edge, you'll see that it's got a white background, right? It's clearly an image. It'll load, but it'll have issues. And you'll have a lot of jagged cuts. But if you want to convert any of these images, all you do is you just copy and paste it in. You don't even need to import it. You can actually copy and paste straight from Google. Then you'll go path and trace bitmap right here. No, you can't see it, so I'm moving it over. All right. Now you have three different real options. There's a lot more in depth, and I encourage everybody to play with it. But all you'll end up doing is the speckles really, if you have any of those little weird outliers, you know what I'm saying? Like if it's an image with a lot more colors and you get the speckles, you can turn that up and it'll reduce those. Smooth corners tries to reduce the number of hard corners. So a lot of times when you select it, it may have a lot of hard corners, or you'll have basically like a polygon result. And then lastly, optimize. Now, if I don't optimize it, what it does is it reduces the number of nodes that happens in a curve. So as you can see on this cow, there's a lot of curves in this artwork. And what it'll do, if I keep it low, it'll make a ton of little nodes all the way through that curve. However, if I do optimize it and make it closer to 1, it'll have a lot less nodes in those curves. So once I hit update and then hit OK, it'll then produce the actual SVG, as you can see. All I do then, close it out, delete the original picture, center it up on the page, and save it and drop it right into easel. But that is literally all there is to it. And just like that, dropping it in, path, trace bitmap, and 9 times out of 10, you'll get your image right away. Does that make sense? I know I just kind of went through that rather quickly, but anything you do in Inkscape, start at the path menu and just select either trace bitmap for an image or object to path or stroke to path, depending on how you're doing your text, if you're dropping in text. And it will produce very, very fine results. The only other concern that you may have is when you're doing your cuts, as you can see, there's a lot of nodes, is you got to determine what matters to you, right? Because certain ones of these may be a little jagged, or if you zoom in, you may have some problems. So you can do the manual optimization way and delete nodes that are in your way, right? And then you can straighten them out as you see fit. Does that make sense? I'm asking. I mean, if y'all have questions as I'm going, please tell me. I just want to make it as easy as I can to understand.
That manual way, that's great. That was a great explanation of that, Loren. Thank you for that. Can you kind of explain how to get it, like if you wanted to optimize it again? So let's say that I optimized it once, but I want to go back in and optimize it a second time, then what would you do?
So you can go back, and I think if I'm correct, you can do trace and do it again, and you can make a second one. I think it will. Let's see here. It may not let me do another one. Traditionally in the past, what I've always done is I would basically adjust these numbers ever so slightly. Now,
Yeah, I think because you didn't adjust it. That might be why I didn't do it.
Yeah, it may. Let's see if it'll do it again. No, it's not letting me. It's being funky. Usually if I shouldn't have deleted that picture out of there. Excuse me. I wonder if I can go back. The picture will come back. There it is. Yeah, so in the past, all I really have done, Reagan, it's okay. It's okay. Is I would just click the original image. If I didn't like the previous one, click it, update the optimization, and hit it again. I'm running fast in the computer. You can do it, computer. There we go. And it'll give you a different version with less nodes. But it's just playing with those numbers. I just see a lot of times people building these images and they're trying to get them right. And they're struggling with them. The other thing is, I wonder if I can. Reagan, it's okay. It's really fixing errors that I'd like to show, but I can't find. Okay. There's a lot of times when people create, especially my wife does a lot of Cricut, and a lot of these laurels will get really jagged. And you'll see this image right here, for example, like, hey, you're trying to cut these out. You see how blurry these are?
Yeah, for sure.
You go in and you path and you trace that bitmap. I find one to be about right. What you'll see is sometimes they're jagged. And you can absolutely go in. A lot of times you can see like the ends of these aren't done right. And you may need to go back in and actually zoom in on them. And you can adjust those to give you that round end that you may want, if that makes sense. But it's really just however you want to do it. Oh, I did something wrong there. I'm clicking my keyboard. My daughter is making it quite challenging. But yes, it really depends on the amount of effort you want to put into it. For me, if I'm doing a one-time quick cut and I know it'll be easier just to finish it on the back end, that's usually what I do. But if I know it's going to be, if it's going to be multiple batch, then I'll take an extra hour and really clean up that cut, because I know in the end it'll make it a lot nicer.
Yeah, just reducing the amount of angles and amount of programming that the G-code has to do can help a lot with the time.
Hey. But for the most part, that's all I really wanted to show. I just know it's come up quite a bit on how to do this. Hang on a second. It's okay. It's okay. But I don't know if anybody has any questions.
Yeah, Don, do you have any questions with that? Does that make sense?
Yeah. Well, again, let's take a step back. A total newbie question. So the Makerverse software is essentially where you use whatever you want as a design tool and then import it into there to actually control the thing, or can you use some of these apps to just go direct? Like that's one of the things I've seen people mentioning, a lot of different software, and I'm like, okay, well, what's what, and what can I do with each one? But
so Yeah, that's a great question. So currently that's correct. You have to create it in another program. So like you have to create an SVG in Illustrator or Inkscape. Then you have to convert that to G code. And that's what people use Easel or Carbide Create for, or some other ones. And then you take that G code and put it inside of MakerVerse, and MakerVerse actually runs the machine. So you've heard us talk a little bit about the updates to MakerVerse and stuff that's coming. And those are some of the things that we really want to combine into MakerVerse to make it more of a one-stop shop for running the M2, because MakerVerse has the ability to run other CNC machines too. It just doesn't have the capabilities to do G code creation yet, or like really basic file creation where you could do text and letters and stuff like that. So we want to get to that point, and that's in development right now. Those are the things that we really want to see in MakerVerse. But right now, you do currently have to go through that process.
Right. Okay. Well, so I got two questions about that came up. So first one's for what Loren just showed us. So how does that relate to the z-axis on that? Like, how do you decide, what's the positive and what's the negative space that you're cutting out, like for that little, fleur de lis or whatever the hell that thing was you just brought up? How do you tell it which part is the cut and which part is the negative space?
Loren, you want to take that? You want to be a
yeah? So sorry, I'm just
you're fine. You're doing great. You're doing great, man. You're multitasking.
So
you're beast.
Really, when you import it into Easel, it'll automatically the black. So notoriously for the M2, you'll want to create images that are black and white, because you're not doing 3D relief. And if you're going to do anything like multiple relief, the best bet, especially if you're starting out, is to do in multiple layers and just add them to one another after you're done. So that's why I recommend whatever you're doing, finish it in black and white, just like I did. The Easel will automatically then take that black and white image that's an SVG and those nodes and build the cuts off of it. But in Easel, I don't know if you mind, I can go ahead and share again. Have you done anything with Easel yet, Don?
No, I like I said, I haven't even built my frame yet, honestly.
Oh, well, I can save you a lot of time and a whole lot of questions. Here we go. I'll do this. Here we go. So can you see my screen?
Yeah.
All right. So you can see I have a whole ton of them. Each one of these that you see across the bottom I've created in one way or another, whether very complex or very simple. Okay. There is good things and bad things about Easel. So in Easel, when you create, unless you have Pro, there's very little things you can do outside of having multiple copies. Like, it doesn't let you control how much or which sections you cut. Now, as you can see, when you go into your cut, you have two options. So you select the item first. That's first and foremost. And you have shape, which tells you where you're putting it, right? Where it's located at, and then the size. And I'll go, I'm assuming you're in North America.
Yes. It's actually odd that you picked the Penn State logo, because I'm a huge Penn State guy. I went to school there.
Yeah, so I actually cut this out for my brother-in-law. So he's a big Penn State fan. So I'm just finishing that up for him for Christmas. But so as you can see, the shape, basically you set up the size and where it's located out on the board. Then you go into cut. This determines how deep of the cut you want it to be. I'm running MDF. I always add a 0.025 to the end of my cut to ensure I cut all the way through. Because a lot of times, like, I'll work to get scrap sheets or whatever it may be. It may be damaged. I can clean it up, but it may be slightly swollen or whatever the case may be. I want to make sure I cut all the way through. So I would always add 0.025 for a ½ inch, right? As you can see. And then you choose your type of cut path. Now, you can clear out a pocket, which you'll see that's what it does, right? You can cut on the shape path, which cuts directly on that line of nodes that you saw from the previous. You can cut outside, which cuts outside of that path, or you can cut inside. So you gotta, like, when you're cutting, you gotta decide how do you want it to look, right? And you can see as you select each one of those, it'll do that appropriately. Now, before you start cutting, if you're cutting it all the way out, especially for the big reason, the M2, all sheet goods sit on their side at a 15-degree angle. You will destroy your piece unless you add those tabs. So typically I add 1/4 inch tabs at an 1/8 inch high. I've never had an issue with that height. I've had guys go a little bit less, but just be very careful based upon how accurate Z-axis is, that you can pay the price and accidentally not create the tab, or they'll be super thick.
Yeah. So Don, tabs hold your material on
Right.
there.
Yeah.
So
Gotcha.
you can see where each one of my yellow, you see the yellow spots, or where each one of the tabs are. It's very simple, very intuitive. You just add more tabs and adjust them around. Easel free it has its issues. Every time you add a tab, watch what it does to the other tabs. It bounces them around, which becomes quite annoying if you wanted to keep them where they were. But it is what it is. So be careful adjusting the number. What I typically do is I look across my piece and I say, where do I need tabs at, right? So I know this earpiece right here, it needs to have its own tab. So I count that as 1. I know this is going to be off to the side, maybe a weak point. I'll add another here. I got some pieces in here, 2 or 3, 4, 5, and I work my way around 6, 7 top and bottom, and like 8 over here. So that's how I came to that number of 8. I basically just count beforehand before I add the tabs, and I move them all at one time. Because if you get to the end and you realize, oh, I need an extra tab, guess what happens? You bump that number up and all of them move, and you got to do it all over again. So,
so you can move those tabs around individually just by clicking on them. You'll get a little node and move it.
Comes up, and I can slide them around.
Right, but can't you just select, like, say you add, say you need 8, maybe 9. You put in 10. Can you remove one or?
No, so that's the challenge. I can't get rid of it.
Gotcha. Okay.
So it's a weakness of the software. That's where I'm saying, like, do your counting ahead of time. These are tips and tricks that I've made hundreds of these. It's just a little tip and trick. Now,
all right.
With that in mind, when you're done, all you got to do is, for the M2, I see this question come up at least once a week on the web or on the Facebook page, is there's a lot of people that get it and they're like, hey, it's not cutting where I tell it to cut. Understand, home for the M2 is 0, 0. So I'm going to zoom out. Well, I kind of zoom out. Let's see here. Doing everything by hand. One hand here. Hey, it's okay. It's okay. If 0, 0. So you see it in the bottom left corner. That is your home for the M2. If you want to start, so depending on, for me, right? Depending on where you want to start that cut, that's where you tell it to go. So if you're trying to start your cut, like, hey, you want to position your home is dead center of the piece before you start the cut. Does that make sense? Like,
yeah.
Then before you start and before you export that code, you need to go up here and put 0 and 0. Do not get wrapped up in the fact that it is off the board, because you've already got it designed. Nothing else has changed. You've got it in position. You know where it's at. And then lastly, you can go up here to project and download G-code, or machine, general settings, and download G-code. And you'll see it pops up down here, and you just save in the file and move it to the computer that's running your machine. Or if it's already on your computer that's running the machine, just run the G-code in Makerverse.
Gotcha.
So inside of Makerverse, I like to set my files to do exactly like Loren did inside of Easel or whatever program you're using, to make it 0, 0 in the center, because you can use the work offsets inside of Makerverse to say, hey, I want a temporary 0 to be over here in this left corner, or down here in the right corner, or something like that. So you can move where it's actually going to cut with your work offsets. So if you might want to cut the first one in the center, but then you can make another work offset and cut another one in like the top right corner and the top left corner, and kind of cut them in different areas as well. So you're not just locked in for that center forever. You can move around and adjust and make temporary work offsets inside of Makerverse, because that's just telling the machine where it's temporarily going to have 0, if that makes sense.
Yes.
Right. Yeah.
In Makerverse, what he's saying, you have a work 0. You have a work 0 versus machine 0. That work 0. So before I start, typically I'm running on a sheet of MDF, 1/2-inch plywood, or whatever it may be, right? I will determine the size that I'm cutting. Then I will determine, hey, I need this much space. I got this blank spot on the board. I'll measure it out with my giant T-square used for drywall. I'll make a mark, move the machine to that location, and then 0 out my work 0, and I'm prepared to cut.
Gotcha. Yeah. So you're kind of making the two softwares jive with each other to
Yes.
give them
If you're
a
trying to-
common
I see
point of
people-
interest.
Right. I see people all the time trying to figure out in easel how far off center they want to cut, and then telling it just to cut from there. Oh, that's brutal. I wouldn't even try. Like that's the hardest way to do it. The other thing, there's a couple of things that like I'm really hoping comes out in Makerverse in the future that you cannot do. And that's it. You cannot rotate the piece in Makerverse. Once you save that G code, other softwares you can rotate the cut once it's already in Makerverse. It cannot do that. You can't adjust.
So you have to do that here.
anything. Yes, you have to do it here. So for me, I don't know if I have it here. I think I do. Yes. So this is my niece's name, Eva Reese. Like all these letters that I jigsawed in, knowing that I wanted to cut in the smallest area possible. I can't do that once it gets into Makerverse. I've got to do it here.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah.
So-
Yeah.
And that's because Makerverse can't make G code creation. So if you changed it, that would be editing and modifying the G code, and it doesn't have that yet.
Right. So go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, so well, go ahead, because this is a separate question, something different. Go ahead.
The other thing you can do, depending on how you like to do it. So depending on the situation, sometimes I will do this actually in Inkscape. I'll arrange them in Inkscape so I can get very precise and then save them into the file and move them over. But it's totally up to you. The only thing you should note, you see how I have this jigsaw. You remember earlier when I was doing my name and I unioned them. Once you create a union and you tie them all together as one, you can't move them individually.
Gotcha.
So,
right.
But if you're moving them, if you're creating an SVG from Inkscape, do not union them. Keep them all separate. They will pop up separately and you can move them separately.
Right. It's
So
kind of like
just something to think
grouping.
about.
It's kind of like grouping and flattening in Photoshop or whatever. Like once you flatten,
Exactly.
it's all. Yeah.
Yeah, it's exactly the same thing. It's exactly, yeah. So it's just something to think about. And the only reason why I like Inkscape is because it's free. It's got a lot of
Right.
shortcomings, but the ability to create an SVG for free and make it look pretty nice is really handy. And I mean, I'll give you an example. So I just finished, I got to cut this afternoon for my father-in-law, big Jeep guy, has a Jeep Gladiator. So I went and searched trying to get an accurate depiction of a Jeep Gladiator and couldn't track it down. Using shapes, just using that path menu, I created this with a high level of precision with almost 0 nodes. It'll cut very, very cleanly. If you run into jagged cuts or issues, especially if you're keeping under 35 inches per minute with a sharp bit and you're having issues, 99 times out of 100, it is because your file is not great. There's a lot of people that get upset their cuts aren't clean. Well, their files they put into the machine just are not pretty. They have a lot of issues. And it's just that same garbage in, garbage out principle.
Right. Right. Yeah. So, Loren, did you ever think of opening up your, a YouTube channel and start recording each of these things?
I did
I would
actually
subscribe
I
right
actually
now.
got a camera. I'm just not really my real problem right now is I just don't have the time. Well, I was going to do it before the holidays. Yeah, our business that we started has it's just been ridiculous. I can't even explain how much I've been.
Yeah,
cutting.
you said last week you were saying how your wife slave driving you.
Yeah. So, oh yeah. So yeah, it's just been a lot. I know there's a lot of Inkscape tutorials out there. I thought about bringing it up and just adding it to the page. Because really it's just a matter of, I want to give back to the community. The community's they're pretty amazing people and everybody's willing to help each other out. I just feel bad when I see them going on there and spending $5, $10 on an SVG that may or may not be that great when they can make it themselves in under 10 minutes.
Well, that's kind of where I'm at. Like I said, I haven't put my gear together yet. And I'm like, okay, the last thing I want to do is, there's so many different softwares out there. I'm like, okay, well, I don't know what I like yet. So I'm trying to get the, free or cheap and then, see what I like before I can start, doing the free trials and stuff like that before I spend any money on anything. So.
No, absolutely. Oh, there is one more thing I can show you. If you decide that you want to do something manually, so I'll show you the Jeep, how I got there, right? So I actually started with this image here. And you can see, and I did the same bitmap method with trace bitmap.
Mhm.
The issue is I started digging into it. There's just issues with it's not symmetrical and it's not that clean. So what I ended up doing is you can actually take this button right here on the left.
Can you switch your monitor?
Yeah, I was gonna say we're still seeing
We
the
only
other.
see Easel
Oh,
on your other monitor.
I'm sorry. Stop share. Let me share it properly.
Yeah, like
I clicked the wrong
you
one.
got dual monitor setup.
Yeah, I do. Sorry, that's my fault.
That's
Can
fine.
y'all see it now?
Yes, there we go.
I'm sorry. So this is the original image. I'll start back from the beginning. This is the original Jeep image that I took because I did a lot of comparisons and I was like, I just don't like it. And as I started, there's a lot of fading. The computer was having trouble getting it precise. So if you take this button right here, it's called Draw Bezier Curves and Straight Lines. What you're doing is you're basically drawing the nodes. So you can then click on it and start drawing across your image as you go. And notoriously, if it's too much, don't get too wrapped up in making it perfect in the original design. Because as you can see, I'm just kind of going for it. And then when I get done, it'll create that image. I'll then fill it with a color, make it a little less so I can see it. Then I can click on this second up here on the top left, back to the node editor. And now I can click on these nodes and straighten them up. And especially if I'm doing just straight rounds, I'll select the whole thing, like every one of them, and then click this one up here, and it'll just round it off.
Nice.
So then I go back in there and I say, okay, where's my issues at? You see what I'm saying? And I go back in there and delete nodes that I shouldn't have clicked in the first place. So I can see this one's a problem. And the good thing is you can absolutely zoom way in, right? And I can delete nodes that I don't need, slide them around, get them right where I want them, adjust ever so slightly. And you can see just like that, I've got the curve almost perfectly the way I want it. So like I said, if you're trying to create a really solid image that you know, hey, I'm going to use this quite a bit. I want it to be perfect. I want it to be just right. I'm going to do that. Now, the other thing is, if you're trading something that you want it symmetrical side to side, now obviously this isn't perfect, right? What I'll end up doing is I will zoom, let me zoom back out, is I will actually find the center of the image, create two nodes at the center, and I'll delete the rest. And I'll explain why. When I delete those, then I collect these two nodes that are at the center, and I'm going to click this little corner. I'm going to double click it or click it once. And now I have a straight line in the center. I'll then take those two nodes, go over here to the align button, which is down here. You can see align and distribute, which I have up here. I'm going to put them on the same vertical path. Those two. Now I just take that same piece, I copy and paste it, and then flip it. And then when I connect them, they're exactly symmetrical. I select both, path and union, and now they're exactly same side by side.
Yeah.
So now when I
that's
create
a
it,
great
I know
trick.
that's obviously very jagged, right? So
Yeah, I love it. It's compensation for the artistically retarded. I love it.
because I struggled to get like both sides exactly the same. And I was like, what am I doing? I can just flip it and make it the same, and it's good to go. And you can see, if I go up here, here's the final image, right? So if I click on this nodes, you can see it's very few nodes in it. It's very clean. I went back to the actual, like I took a bunch of different images, overlaid it, and you can see it's almost perfect. So just an idea.
That's great, Loren.
Yeah. So I've got to cut that out this afternoon. It's my way of compensating because I can't draw very well. But give me a computer, I can make it happen.
Yeah, same here. Same here.
So like I said, it's far from great, but it'll get it done. When you get into your final image and your final cuts, the last thing I can recommend is take the time in your cuts or before you start the cut to come down here to this measurement tool on the bottom left and measure your smallest point. Now, obviously, this is a pretty giant piece, right? But you can see this is my smallest point, and it is giving me a problem here. It's 0.91 inches side to side, just that spot here. Just under is 0.69 inches. So I basically measure my weak points. Is it going to give me problems? Does that make sense? Half inch, just over a half inch. So, because you should know, unless your bit is brand new, if you get under 1/4 of an inch, tear out is very common, especially because most of us are cutting with plywood. You'll literally cut and knock layers straight off, and then you're going back with wood putty to clean things up. So, specifically, I don't know if y'all see an easel, but can y'all see easel right now?
Yeah.
This part right here, the mouth, yep, it jacked me up. It tore out. I tried to make it too sharp and ended up having to go back with putty and clean it up. But it's one of those things you can absolutely fix it. You can absolutely do it. In the past, I've actually even cut sections off and just cut that little piece right there, cleaned it up, and reinforced with like a little bit of wire or something, and attached it back with some CA glue, and it works just fine. You can hide your mistakes a lot of times, but yeah, just check yourself, and especially in corners like that, you'll really appreciate taking the time to get it right. But anyway, another little tip there. Sorry, I think about these things.
Keep them coming.
That's great.
Coming.
But I don't think about it when I'm not actually. When I'm trying to explain it, I forget that I do these things naturally, just over time.
Well, that's awesome, Loren. Yeah, thanks a lot for going through that and showing us some tips and tricks. I really appreciate it. I'm gonna cut this out too, Don. You're
That's
asking.
Okay.
And Loren, if you don't mind, yeah, I'll cut that part out and post it on our
Oh,
socials.
absolutely. I keep thinking about it. I just haven't had the time. As you can see, I'm dual tasking right now, being Mr. Mom. But Don, if you want to, I'm on that Facebook page. I don't comment too often. A lot of times Casey and them will comment a lot more.
Yeah.
But you can find me, same name. If you have questions, I usually respond pretty quickly. Shoot me a text, or if you're trying to create files or you have questions, and I'm happy to respond.
Yeah, cool.
There's not a whole lot of Mike Garzas out there, so yeah, he is very, very helpful in getting things solved. But sometimes users like me or Casey or Drew will get back to you a little faster in a quick pinch, or just trying to figure something out.
Yeah. So